Last time we looked at how to create a screen in Pygame, but today we'll be looking at how to create a clock object and why it would be useful to have one. I also noticed that I created some comments in our main loop. First, I created comments for our events. All our events, such as mouse movement, keyboard input, so on, will happen above before our game logic. And once our game logic happens, meaning like movement and stuff like that, we can draw on the screen. So getting back to the clock object, a clock object allows us to control our frames per second, so how fast our loop is looping. This is very important because not all computers run at the same speed. If you're on a fast computer, then without the clock object your game would seem incredibly fast, while if you're on a slow computer, it'd be much slower, and you don't want your users to have different gaming experiences depending on which computer they are on. So this is why we create a clock object. So I'm just going to name my clock Pygame time clock. Now we also want to declare a frames per second, and I'll set mine to 24. So, and this actually doesn't belong in either events, logic, nor display, so I just put it at the very end. It'll be one of the only things that will be out of the comments. So clock tick FPS. So now our loop is looping at 24 frames per second. And this is good for the reasons I mentioned earlier, but it's also good for event handling. So if we know how many frames are happening in 1 second, then we know how many frames will be in 1 minute. Therefore, we can execute bits of code at every minute or at whichever interval we specify. So frames per minute would equal 60 times the FPS. And you would also need another variable called total frames. So watch what I'm about to do. So if I say total frames plus equals 1 for every time the loop loops, and I say if total frames modulus frames per minute equals 0, then the code that's going on in here will execute every minute. So this is a really smart way to do things, is having this whole frames per second thing going on in the clock object. It'll really help you when you're designing your game to know what time everything is happening. So that's just a quick tutorial on the clock object. I will be using it maybe to spawn enemies and stuff like that. So guys, thanks for watching. Hope you learned something, and I'll see you around.